Hey everyone, Tactics here, and it's that time again where we're going to be taking a look at how all 6 tank specs are stacking up both in terms of raid and Mythic Plus going into patch 11.2 and season 3. As always, I gotta hit you with some disclaimers. First, if you are someone whose goal is up to Keystone Legend, Mythic Plus, or cutting edge, ahead of the curve in raid, every single one of these tank specs is just fine to accomplish your goals. You can do it on all of the 6, so do not let this tier list or any other tier list tell you what you should enjoy playing. Second, this only takes into account tuning as of August 1st. Anything that happens tuning wise beyond that date is not considered and could change the order of this tier list. All right, disclaimers out of the way. Let's get into it, starting on the left here with Mythic Plus, where I honestly think this is going to be one of the more balanced seasons for tanks in this expansion. So let's start out with Vengeance. I don't really think there's going to be a lot happening for Vengeance going into this season, right? The main nerfs, which I think we saw a new nerf this week, where they lost 2% parry. So their parry is a little bit down, but it's not really going to be significant. Their damage is probably in a similar spot where their personal damage is not really the highest out of all the tank specs, but obviously they're bringing that magic debuff, right? So they are buffing all the caster DPS, and if caster DPS are looking good, which they are right now, you think got things like Shadow Priest, you got things like Mage, which are looking to be quite good, and if those things are in the meta and are in the comp, then obviously having a Demon Hunter buff is very valuable. That brings a lot of damage. Now, that being said, there is the caveat that potentially Havoc is building an argument to join the Mythic Plus comp as that third DPS spec. Now, if that's the case, then obviously this heavily diminishes Vengeance's value. I don't know how that's going to turn out personally. I'm not 100% sold on Havoc having a spot, but it is a potential, and I do want to add that caveat in here as well. But for now, I'm going to put it on the top of S tier. Its really only weakness defensively is healing reductions, and there is a pretty substantial healing reduction in a couple dungeons. So one's in Arakara at the end, which is new, and then one is in Halls of Atonement in the middle area, though that one recently did get a pretty sizable nerf. But outside of that, that's their only weakness, right? They're not really struggling in terms of magic damage intake, physical damage intake, debuffs, whatever it is. They're pretty solid against it, and probably the most solid overall defensive tank, and that's always super valuable. Obviously, you have dungeons like Priory making a comeback where there's not a lot of other tank specs that can do the kind of lockdown that they can do on those packs, so that's also pretty valuable. And so I'm going to leave it up here in the S tier, but again, I could see this falling down a tier if Havoc starts to make a rise in the DPS spot. Now, I don't want to leave Vengeance alone up here, so I'm going to put what tank would potentially take that spot if Havoc makes a rise, or if, you know, physical DPS or attack power based DPS make a rise. I'm putting Prot Warrior up here. I know a lot of people are very high on Brewmaster. Obviously, I've done a bit of testing, and full disclosure here, Brewmaster is like my least experienced tank out of all of them. But, you know, I've looked at other people playing Brewmaster basically, and I think in general, unless you are already bringing a warrior, or for some reason you specifically think Brewmaster is going to live something that Prot Warrior can't in a specific dungeon, I don't see why you wouldn't want to run a Prot Warrior, right? 1-to-1, the buff of attack power versus physical damage. Attack power is just straight up better, especially if you're playing a Havoc Demon Hunter, for example. You're actually buffing a Havoc, whereas, you know, the physical debuff is not. You have things like Disrupting Shout as an AoE interrupt to actually stop casters, to a similar way that Vengeance Demon Hunter can with Silent Sigil. When it comes to personal damage, I'm giving the win to Prot Warrior. I don't think Brewmaster would be super far behind, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Brewmaster is actually a bit better, but Mountain Thane Prot Warrior has been absolutely cranking on the PTR in both single target and AoE, by the way. And again, it's kind of benefiting of a similar thing as Brewmaster, where a lot of their single target damage stuff and their AoE damage stuff is similar, and so they don't lose a bunch of single target damage in their AoE build, which is obviously very beneficial, even coming from a tank. And like, you see sometimes they're playing a somewhat execute related build, even because they have so much rage gen that they can drop rage generation in their tree to pick up like the execute cleaving talent and stuff. So Thane is owning. I think it's got a lot of benefits. I think, you know, it buffs potential good DPS, right? If you see like Frost Run Holy DKs, which are still solid even after nerfs. Hunter, which is maybe questionable now after nerfs, but who knows? Basically, all these physical DPS that don't do physical damage. I guess attack power DPS that don't do physical damage is better, and then you actually get value out of the raid buff versus Brewmaster. But yeah, I'm gonna put Prot Warrior in the S tier. I'm sure some people are gonna be mad at this. And we're gonna put Brewmaster instead at the top of A. Again, it's solid. This is probably the best Brewmaster has been in a long time, in a long time, maybe since Shadowlands. And I think that's also going to hold true for Raid a little bit, but it's still just not quite there, in my opinion. In my opinion, it's just a little bit below the rest of the tanks. But I do think it's important to note here that the gap between the S tier tanks and the A tier tanks is not very large. I think one of the bigger weaknesses of Brewmaster is still the sustain. Like, I think the talents have helped a lot, but they do still need more attention than a tank like Vengeance, for example, where Vengeance tank against everything. Obviously, Warrior is a little bit weaker against the magic stuff, especially with the loss of spell block. But Brewmaster, I think it's still a little bit more attention required from the healer, which is not really a big deal this season if Resto Druid remains a powerhouse like it has been on the PTR. Resto Druid is just kind of insane right now. I know I've heard there's like some bugs that make it potentially better than it actually is, but it's very, very strong, and that's a healer that's it's very easy for them to just throw out some hots on the Brewmaster and that covers you, right? You just need a little bit of external healing to kind of keep up with things. And so potentially if Resto Druid remains a strong pick and you pair that with Brewmaster, you just don't even notice that issue. But it is something I want to flag with some potential healer combinations. It's still a super fun tank. I had a great time playing this tank on the PTR. Really enjoyed it. I just think it's a step below a little bit these tanks above it. Next to it, we're throwing Prot Paladin. Obviously, everyone knows how insane the Prot Paladin utility kit is, right? They can interrupt the universe, 1 minute sack, spell warding plus bop, Devo Aura. It's crazy. They have so much that they bring. Throughout season 2, their main issue was living. They got excessively nerfed almost, moving from season 1 to season 2. We also saw a change of philosophy where like things like periodic damage, things like magical tank busters were almost entirely removed, and just everyone was smacking you in the face. And that's where Prot Paladin really struggled, right? They preferred to have different kind of damage intake, especially with the nerfs where they got their parry kind of hammered down a bit. Obviously, more stats going into the season, more crit is just going to equal more parry, where I think Paladin might have the most parry or maybe similar parry to Demon Hunter. They have a lot of parry, basically, with the amount of crit they have and their parry towns. They're parrying a lot. Obviously, you can still hit that 100% spell block, which you're hitting in season 1, so that's not even difficult to hit. And the damage, specifically intake, is kind of changing. They're pulling back a little bit on everything is just meleeing you. You've got some bolt casters in a few dungeons. You've got a lot more debuffs across the dungeons, and those are all things that Paladin really excels at because of their whether it's the immunities to clear debuffs or the fact that they can just block debuffs, being in Consecrate with their mastery, that kind of thing, interrupt all these spellcasters who were then melee for considerably less damage than a non-spellcaster. And that's kind of where Paladin excels. And so it's not that they've gotten a lot of buffs defensively going into the season, but the damage intake is shifting slightly, which is beneficial for Prot Paladin. They are also swapping back to Lightsmith, it seems, at least in Mythic Plus, which is also a very slight defensive gain, I would say. And their tier set lets them kind of blanket allies with more sacred weapons and more of the, or lesser weapons, I guess, and lesser bulwark. So you do actually have a little bit of, I guess, off healing. It's not huge, but it is a little bit. And obviously, whenever Paladin is strong enough to do these key levels, like the insane utility they bring is just so valuable. I do think you will have to work harder to live than all three of these tanks in most dungeons. I think there's obviously some dungeons which are heavy on magic damage or heavy on debuffs where this is going to be better. But outside of those like 1 or 2 dungeons, I think these 3 tank specs will all have an easier time living. Not saying Paladin cannot live, just that you will need to work harder, be more careful, potentially take more tries if you're using resilient keys, that kind of thing. But I think it's solid, and that's why it's in the A tier. Then we got Blood DK. I'm going to put Blood DK down in the B tier. Obviously, we have the Blood DK dooming of, we lost A-Bomb's Limb, we got AMZ nerfed in a Mythic Plus environment. The other DKs are doing similar things with grips and all that. So all we've done as Blood DK is kind of lose things going into this tier. We did see a recent buff where they increased the strength or the armor value of Bone Shield by another 15% of your strength, I believe. So it was actually kind of decent for dealing with melee swings. It's not nothing. It's not a ton. I don't think it really changes anything. And especially if you're looking at this tank, right? You're the only one not bringing a raid buff. And outside of AMZ, which again is nerfs, their utility in general is quite lacking. Their silence, their AoE silence, is not an interrupt, unlike both Vengeance and Prot Warrior, which I think would probably help them if that one counted as an interrupt, but it just doesn't right now. And it's just their output is fine, because that's really what they need to shine in, right? They need to either be the tankiest tank or the highest damage tank to kind of overwhelm the utility of these tanks. And in that case, they would be on the table, right? Season 3, Season 4 of Shadowlands. But neither of those things is true right now. Their damage is solid after a series of buffs. Durability is very binary. It's like it's really, really good up to a key level, and then at some key level, it's just like I am in danger every single pull. And so because of that, I am going to leave it down in the B tier. And then we have Guardian, which I think it's like an A minus B plus. You know, somewhere in the middle of here. Maybe I'll put it at the bottom of A tier. I think Guardian, it's one of those tanks that not a lot of people really play a lot of. They're not really a big fan of it or whatever. And they're also the issue of Resto Druid, which I talked about earlier. If Resto Druid is really, really good, that basically takes like all of the utility value of Guardian and throws it in the bin, right? Because it brings all the same things. Guardian has nothing unique that it brings really to a group. There is the minor benefit where they have that new like beacon-ish talent where they heal themselves, it heals other people, or one other person rather, and so that's like a very, very minor thing. I would say Guardian gets the most benefit of that, but it's not like it heals a ton and most of it's overhealing. And so outside of that, they don't bring anything of value. Their damage, Alun's Chosen, even after the most recent significant buffs, is still on the lower end. I would say lower than all 5 tank specs. It's just the lowest tank damage. There is some interesting stuff with Druid of the Claw, which I've been having a lot of fun playing Druid of the Claw in keys on the PTR, but it does still definitely have that issue of if you have bad luck and you don't get procs to put a Tooth and Claw or a Ravage Bleed out, and you just have nothing up when you need it, you can just fall over, right? And that is problematic when you're trying to, you know, be consistently durable, right? Why aren't you just playing Vengeance when you can just always have something available? You're not really reliant on procs whatsoever, right? And so I think it's going to be Alun's Chosen, and if it's Alun's Chosen, they're just the worst damage. Druid utility is great, but again, Resto Druid. So you know, B plus, A minus. We'll put it there. I think it's solid. I would personally have it above Blood DK for sure, but you know, somewhere in here, maybe we'll put it at B. We'll put it in B plus. That way we got the nice distribution, 2 tanks in each tier. And again, tank balance overall, I think very, very close. The gaps between each of these tiers is not that big. Let's move on though, and let's talk raid, where everyone mad at Vengeance Demon Hunter can feel a bit better about themselves or something. I'm gonna put Vengeance as the B tier tank here. There's just, unless you specifically need the raid buff, there's really just no reason to bring a Vengeance Demon Hunter, in my opinion. Like, they just do less damage than Blood DK. If you need like a more mobile Blood DK for some reason, I guess that's like the one benefit they have over Blood DK, but like, they do less damage than Blood DK. If you're looking at a raid, the new AMZ, I think in almost all situations is better than Darkness. So that, you know, you want that new AMZ. You obviously, as is Blood DK, you get individual grips on top of mass grip. They just have chains. So, you know, AoE silence is not really valuable in a raid environment. Niche, but I don't really see anything that's going to be valuable in this raid. So we're putting VDH here in B tier. Just not really a great raid tank overall. It's fine, but it's just, it doesn't really have any super high positives going for it. Moving up, let's put Blood DK. Boom. Blood DK in A tier. Like I said, it's got the grips. It's basically just better VDH. Very competitive damage, at least Sanlean is, after a recent set of buff after buff. They did get some collateral nerfs mixed in there with all the buffs, but I think after all the dust settles, their damage is very solid. It's not the best, but it's competitive with the higher damage tanks. It's probably middle of the pack. Like, I think probably Guardian, Prot Warrior, and Brew all beat it in terms of damage output, but it's right there. It is right there, and obviously it does have execute upside with Sanlean and Soul Reaper combined with that. So over something like Brewmaster and Guardian, which have no execute upside. If execute's important, all of a sudden you can push its damage up a little bit. Maybe it's just competitive with Prot Warrior, but yeah, overall I think it's fine. Again, I don't think it's going to be used unless specifically the DPS DKs get nerfed. Obviously, there's been that whole bit of grips are a raid buff in terms of actual mythic testing. Grips seem relevant on boss 1, boss 3, and then that's it outside of the last boss, which does have ads. So I am going to assume that it's going to be relevant on the last boss as well. How relevant is up for debate still. Do we need 2 full DKs with grip? Do we need 4 fiends? If that is the case, potentially you will see a blood DK then. If that is not the case, I would not be surprised if you just see DPS DKs fill that spot. And so because of that, I'm going to put DK in the A tier. Next to them in the A tier, I'm putting Brewmaster. Again, I think it's solid, but when you're looking at Monk, is it solid enough to want to bring multiple monks? That's the question. Probably not. And so then the next question is, are the other monk specs good? Windwalker is decent. It's not the best melee DPS spec. It's just kind of in the middle after the recent bug fixes and aura stuff. So it's fine, but it's not anything crazy like it was in Season 2. Mistweaver, I think, is pretty solid. Potentially one of the better healers, and potentially something that you are going to consider bringing your monk buff from. So really, it's kind of up in the air. Like, do you want your monk buff from Brewmaster? If so, super solid option. I don't think it does anything unique. There are some situations in the last couple bosses where there are some knockbacks, potentially mobility requirements, that kind of thing. And so obviously Brewmaster does excel in that kind of situation with the Transcend and obviously all their mobility. But kind of like in Mythic Plus, if you have your raid buff coverage, is your bonus tank going to be a Brewmaster? I don't think so. I think it would, again, rather be a Prot Warrior. And so I'm going to put that in the A tier because I think if I were to make a raid comp right now, I would include Mistweaver for my monk buff. And while Brewmaster is good, I don't think it's good enough to be a second copy of a monk. Moving on. Guardian Druid, similar problems, right? Where it brings nothing but a raid buff in a raid environment. So unless it is specifically the highest tuned tank in terms of damage output, there's no real reason to bring it if you don't need Mark of the Wild. And yeah, again, that remains true. It's not the highest damage tank. It's just behind Prot Warrior, probably ahead of these two, specifically talking about Druid of the Claw, which absolutely owns, by the way. The damage output is crazy, but not as crazy as Warrior. Warrior is very, very high damage. It kind of owns. So because of that, it's not going to be your bonus tank. Obviously, Boomkin Gaslighting aside, Feral Druid's looking solid. Resto Druid's obviously looking solid in keys, maybe a little less so in raid. But I kind of expect you either bring a Feral or a Boomkin for Druid buff. And then is Guardian good enough for a second copy? It's close, but I don't think so personally. So we're going to leave it in the A tier because output-wise, it is still a very, very solid tank. Then we have Prot Warrior, where this is the tank spec that I think is currently the best tuned in terms of personal output. Their upfront damage owns. Obviously, they are insanely sturdy. The loss of spell block is almost entirely irrelevant in a raid environment. I think you very rarely ever even spec'd it across the last couple tiers, or all the tiers basically spell block has existed. The number of bosses where you actually spec'd into it is very low, and especially with the current kind of playstyle where you're doing double shield wall, you heavily CDR it. You can potentially grab that spell reflect DR increase now, which is very, very good and not quite the same, obviously, but it's not really a huge loss for them in raid. And so you look at their damage output, it's extremely high, the highest out of all the tanks, in my opinion. Their execute damage obviously is a thing still, and Mountain Thane in particular just gets so much rage. They get flooded with rage that they can dump a ton into executes in execute range, especially if they're obviously not tanking anything. But even if they are tanking stuff, it's not really a big deal to dump rage into execute because you just have so many executes. So I think if you are going to bring a tank that is not giving a raid buff, it's Prot Warrior. And then obviously if you are bringing a raid buff, it's just like any of these, basically, if it is your raid buff, it is S plus plus tier, right? That's just the way it goes for raid buffs in a raid environment. But yeah, if you look at the tank that has the best option without being the raid buff, my thought is Prot Warrior. That's why it's the head of A. And that brings us to Paladin. I'm going to put it in S. Interestingly enough, I don't really think this has anything to do with the tank's output. Their damage is not good. Let's be clear. Like, Prot Paladin damage in single target, not great. They potentially have some, like, Lightsmith shenanigans on bosses where you can, like, cleave stuff. Because even after the nerfs, like, their Hammer and Anvil, lesser weapon stuff, their damage played correctly is decent. But I would put it as lower than all 4 of these tanks, certainly. Probably less than Vengeance, unless you get to do some cheesy stuff. Not 100% sure on that, but you're not bringing a Prot Paladin for their damage, right? No one says, yeah, we're going to bring Prot Paladin for their damage in today's day and age. It's because they just bring so much insane stuff. 1 minute sack that you can pretty much safely use whenever you want. A tank with an immunity. Very valuable for the last or second last boss, potentially the last boss. Not 100% sure, obviously it's untested, but you can do some crazy things with bubble taunts or spell warding on Nexus King, which is looking to be one of, if not the hardest boss in the entire raid. And so that alone, just that bonus on Nexus King, kind of bumps this tank up. Whenever you can do some crazy stuff with bubble or spell warding, it becomes, maybe we should bring Paladin or Prot Paladin for Paladin buff. That aside, looking at the other Paladin specs, obviously Ret is a thing. It's gotten a couple sets of buffs recently. I think it's, again, a solid DPS spec, but potentially not the best DPS spec. So a very similar spot to something like Windwalker that we talked about previously. Holy Paladin, I don't know. Holy Paladins, they've just been dooming nonstop all expansion, I feel like, and I don't know what to believe anymore. They could be great, but I don't know that I've seen a Holy Paladin in the wild in like 2 full patches, so I couldn't really tell you. Our guild, personally, I don't think we have maybe we have one singular Holy Paladin prepped as an alt, but I think that's it. So if you're looking at Paladin buff, it's very, very likely that it's just going to be from Prot Paladin, because they're also just so good utility-wise on the last couple of bosses, and that's kind of why it's S tier. Like, the damage-wise, again, not great, but so much other stuff that it just makes it so that if you look at, like, the Hall of Fame guilds, I'd expect a lot of them to be bringing Prot Paladin as one of their tanks and also their Paladin buff specifically. But that is it, guys. That is my rankings for how tanks are looking going into Season 3. I would love to know your thoughts. What are you guys planning to main? How terribly wrong am I about this entire list? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're there, remember to subscribe, because I've got a ton of content coming in the near future. We've got Keystone Legend guides, Pug Route walkthroughs, normal, heroic, and mythic Mana Forge or Mega raid guides, and much more. As usual, I have to thank all my amazing Patreons for their continued support, making all this stuff possible. Otherwise, thanks everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.